Samantha stepped into the room, her heart steady, but her mind alert. The air was thick with the hum of conversation, a mix of confident voices discussing strategies, logistics, and stories from years in the military world. She knew she didn't quite fit the image most of the people here expected. She was a woman, young, dressed casually in a simple blouse and jeans, carrying nothing but a small notebook and her confidence. Already, a few eyes flicked toward her, sizing her up with quick, unspoken judgments. Some had that little smirk, the one that said, "You don't belong here." As she moved further inside, she noticed the men talking in small clusters, their postures relaxed but sharp, like soldiers who had spent years in the field. Their voices were confident, even booming, and each sentence seemed to carry a weight of authority. Samantha felt the familiar twinge of doubt that sometimes crept in when she entered spaces like this. Not because she wasn't capable, she knew her skills, her training, and her experience, but because she knew the world often underestimated women, especially in fields dominated by men. The room had the usual signs of experience. Framed awards and photos of soldiers on deployment, shelves lined with models of military vehicles, and charts depicting tactical operations. The men talked in terms that were precise, using acronyms and jargon that could make any outsider's head spin. Yet Samantha had spent years learning these terms, practicing these skills, and mastering the kind of knowledge most people assumed was too difficult for someone like her. She approached the nearest group, a cluster of 5 men who were laughing at some shared joke. Their laughter dropped a little as she came closer, but the curiosity in their eyes was mixed with skepticism. Samantha could feel the weight of their judgment, the invisible question lingering in the air. Who is she, and what is she doing here? She greeted them politely, her voice calm but confident. "Good morning," she said, offering a warm smile. The response was minimal, a nod, a slight glance, but she didn't let that discourage her. This was expected. People like her often had to break the ice carefully, slowly earning the space they deserved. She knew that, in moments like this, patience could be just as powerful as skill. As she moved to a table at the side of the room, she overheard snippets of conversation. They were discussing military contracts, strategies, and experiences in ways that sounded almost like storytelling, yet carried a subtle tension, as if proving knowledge was a kind of competition. She listened quietly, picking up points, noting the mistakes in their assumptions, the overconfidence, and even the small gaps in logic that only someone with her experience could notice. Samantha was not just here to observe. She was here to participate, to contribute, and to remind everyone in the room that appearances could be deceiving. She could feel their underestimation, but she didn't need to confront it immediately. She had learned long ago that people often revealed their prejudices before realizing the reality. All she needed was the right moment, the perfect timing, to turn their assumptions upside down. As she settled at the table, she opened her notebook and began reviewing her notes for the upcoming discussion. Every so often, a man would glance at her, some out of curiosity, others with a faint smirk, probably thinking she was just a woman who didn't truly belong in this arena. She let them think that there was power in being underestimated, in having people make assumptions that could later be shattered with a single revelation. Her thoughts briefly drifted back to her training, to the countless hours spent pushing her limits, to the boot camp mornings where the sun hadn't even risen and she had already been running, climbing, and learning to trust herself in ways that few could understand. That discipline, that inner strength, was not visible to anyone walking into the room now. Yet it was there, solid and unshakable, a foundation she carried quietly beneath the surface. A few minutes later, a senior contractor noticed her lingering at the edge of the group and called out a casual, almost dismissive, "Hey, are you here for the coffee or the strategy?" There was a chuckle from a couple of others. Samantha's lips curved into a small, knowing smile, but she didn't respond immediately. She simply looked around, observing their body language, their subtle gestures, and the confidence with which they underestimated her. She knew the game. She had played it before in classrooms, on training grounds, and even in deployment settings where men had assumed she couldn't handle the work. Every time, she had proven them wrong. Not by arguing, not by shouting, but by demonstrating her knowledge, her skills, and her unshakable composure. Today would be no different. Samantha adjusted her notebook and sat down, her posture calm and assured. The men may have laughed at her silently in their minds, but she was ready. In this room, like in life, assumptions were dangerous, and she knew exactly how to make them realize that strength, courage, and intelligence were not defined by gender. As the room buzzed with conversation, Samantha waited, poised for the moment when she would no longer be underestimated. Her presence alone was a quiet challenge to the assumptions around her. Soon, they would learn that being just a woman was the furthest thing from the truth. Samantha sat at the side of the room, her notebook open, listening carefully. The conversation among the contractors continued, full of technical terms, abbreviations, and stories of past missions. To most, it was just chatter, but Samantha heard more than words. She could see the patterns, the gaps, the assumptions that some of the men made without even realizing it. She had learned long ago that listening first was the best way to understand the battlefield, whether literal or figurative. One of the men, tall and broad-shouldered, leaned back in his chair and started talking about a recent project involving strategic planning for military equipment distribution. His voice carried authority, and a few others nodded in agreement as he spoke. Samantha could tell that he was confident, but she also noticed the cracks in his reasoning. His plan, while sound on the surface, ignored certain logistical challenges and human factors that could cause serious problems if overlooked. Quietly, she made notes in her notebook, jotting down questions and alternative approaches. She wasn't about to interrupt yet. She knew the right moment to speak would carry more weight if she waited. Still, a faint smile crossed her lips as she noticed the way the men underestimated her. They assumed she was just observing, a woman in the room who had no real experience. They didn't know that she had faced challenges far tougher than anything discussed here, that she had worked in high-pressure situations where split-second decisions could mean the difference between success and failure. After a while, the conversation shifted to equipment handling and tactical strategies. One of the men, with a slightly mocking tone, asked if Samantha had ever dealt with this kind of fieldwork. She smiled politely, her calm demeanor hiding the surge of determination inside. "I've handled situations like this before," she said simply, her voice steady and confident. Her words were casual, almost understated, but they carried a quiet authority that made a few of the men glance at her more carefully. Despite her calm tone, some of the men still exchanged skeptical looks. It was clear they were thinking, she's just a woman. Maybe she doesn't understand the details. Samantha didn't feel insulted. Instead, she felt energized. She had grown used to these moments, knowing that people often revealed their true biases before they recognized someone's real abilities. The room was full of opportunity, not just for discussion, but for proving that assumptions could be shattered with facts, skill, and calm confidence. When the discussion turned to a complex scenario involving coordination between multiple teams in a high-pressure operation, Samantha saw her chance. She raised her hand slightly, catching the attention of the group. "I think there's another way to approach this," she said, her voice firm but respectful. Heads turned and a few eyebrows raised. The men leaned in slightly, curiosity replacing some of the skepticism. Samantha began outlining her approach, step by step, explaining how certain factors had been overlooked and how adjusting the plan could prevent possible issues. She didn't speak in a loud, dominating way. She spoke logically, clearly, and with confidence. As she spoke, the men started nodding slowly, some murmuring agreements. She could see the surprise in their eyes. They hadn't expected her to have such knowledge, to analyze so carefully, to think so strategically. For Samantha, this was familiar territory. She had often been the only woman in rooms like this, facing the subtle, sometimes not so subtle doubts of those around her. Each time, she had learned to remain calm, to let her expertise speak louder than their assumptions. Today was no different. She let the men finish their points, acknowledged their valid ideas, and then offered her perspective. By the time she finished, the laughter and mockery that had filled the room earlier had faded, replaced by attentive silence and, for some, reluctant admiration. As the discussion continued, Samantha found herself gradually becoming more involved in the planning. The men, still cautious, started to ask her questions directly. "What do you think about this approach?" one of them asked. Another nodded in agreement, looking at her for insight. Each question was an opportunity to demonstrate not just her knowledge, but her experience, her ability to think under pressure, and her practical understanding of strategies that many of these men had only read about or discussed theoretically. Throughout the conversation, Samantha kept her composure. She didn't feel the need to prove anything aggressively. Her calm confidence did that for her. The subtle shift in the room was noticeable. Where they had once glanced at her with doubt, they now looked at her with consideration. They were beginning to see her not as just a woman, but as someone with real expertise, someone whose voice mattered. By the end of this segment of the discussion, Samantha had contributed several key points that improved the team's planning. She had identified overlooked risks, suggested alternative strategies, and reinforced solid ideas that had already been proposed. The men, some still a little surprised, began treating her as an equal participant. It was a small victory, but an important one. One more step toward changing their perceptions and earning the respect she deserved. As she leaned back slightly, letting the conversation continue around her, Samantha allowed herself a quiet sense of satisfaction. She knew this was just the beginning. The room still had its doubts and its assumptions, but she had already started to break through them. And she knew that soon, the next revelation, something far more visible than her words, would make them realize exactly who she was. The room was buzzing with energy, the kind that comes from a group of people who are confident in their knowledge and experience. Samantha had already started to make her presence felt, quietly but effectively. She had contributed her insights, asked thoughtful questions, and highlighted details that others had overlooked. Yet, despite this, she could still feel the subtle resistance from a few of the men, those who had yet to accept that a young woman could hold her own in a room like this. One of them, a middle-aged man with a booming voice and a habit of gesturing with his hands, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "You know," he said, letting the words hang in the air, "it's always impressive when a woman even tries to keep up with this kind of work." His tone was casual, almost joking, but Samantha caught the edge of condescension in it. A few others chuckled quietly, not wanting to be left out. Samantha could feel the familiar sting of underestimation, the kind she had encountered countless times before, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she allowed a calm smile to cross her face, letting the tension settle like a quiet challenge. The man continued, clearly enjoying the attention his remark had drawn. "I mean, don't get me wrong, we love having everyone here," he said, chuckling. "But this stuff is, well, it's not exactly what most women are trained for." A few more laughs followed. Samantha could see it. The subtle eye rolls, the slight shakes of the head, the quick glances at one another that said, "She doesn't belong here, does she?" For a moment, Samantha simply listened. She didn't interrupt. She had learned over the years that people often reveal more about themselves when they feel comfortable mocking someone. The sarcasm, the jokes, and the laughter were not just words, they were a test. They were seeing if she would flinch, if she would try to defend herself, if she would react emotionally. She had never reacted that way before, and she wasn't about to start now. Calmly, she waited, letting them believe for a moment that they had the upper hand. Then, as the laughter continued, she leaned back slightly in her chair, keeping her posture relaxed and confident. Her eyes met the smirks with steady calm, and in that silent gaze, she began to reclaim the space that had been doubted. She didn't speak, but her presence alone carried authority. It was subtle yet unmistakable. She was not intimidated, she was not lesser, and she would not allow their assumptions to define her. The man who had made the joke noticed her silence and paused, expecting a flustered response or a defensive remark. But Samantha simply shifted her hand to her wrist, checking her watch casually, and in that small motion, something remarkable happened. The sleeve of her blouse moved just enough to reveal a glimpse of an intricate tattoo on her forearm. It was unmistakable to anyone familiar with military symbols. The emblem of the United States Marine Corps, inked with precision and care, a mark earned through years of rigorous training, discipline, and service. The room seemed to freeze for a split second. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Eyes widened. A silence spread across the group that was heavier than any words Samantha could have spoken. The man who had been laughing first blinked, then leaned forward slightly, as if to make sure he wasn't imagining what he saw. Another contractor, mid-sentence, stopped talking altogether, his mouth slightly open. Samantha's calm smile didn't waver. She knew exactly the effect this small revelation would have. The tattoo was more than ink on skin. It was proof of resilience, dedication, and experience that no one in the room had anticipated. She let the moment hang in the air, allowing the men to process what they were seeing. The laughter had vanished. The smirks were gone. Instead, there were stunned expressions, questions forming on faces that were too surprised to speak immediately. The underestimation, the jokes, the mockery, they all dissipated in an instant, replaced by a silent acknowledgement that they had misjudged her completely. Finally, one of the men, slightly shaking his head, spoke. "Wait, you were a Marine?" His voice was a mixture of disbelief and awe. Samantha simply nodded, her smile calm and knowing. She didn't need to explain further. Her presence, her tattoo, and the quiet confidence she carried said more than words ever could. The room's energy shifted instantly. Where there had been mockery, there was now respect. Where there had been doubt, there was now curiosity. And where there had been laughter at her supposed simplicity, there was now recognition of her strength, her experience, and her authority. Samantha had turned the room's perception in a single quiet moment, not through confrontation, but through proof. As conversations began to pick up again, this time with genuine interest in her thoughts, Samantha allowed herself a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had known this moment would come, the one where her skills and experience would speak louder than any assumptions. The laughter, the smirks, and the mockery were all part of the journey, the necessary contrast that made the revelation even more powerful. In that room, Samantha had shown something important. Assumptions can only go so far, and strength, courage, and dedication are never defined by appearance or gender. She had been underestimated, mocked, and doubted. But she had also turned it into her advantage, quietly commanding respect without saying a single word at first. The tattoo was more than a mark on her skin. It was a symbol of her journey, her resilience, and the undeniable truth that she belonged here just as much as anyone else. And in that moment, the room understood it. The room had gone silent. For a moment, the hum of conversation, the confident voices, and the casual laughter seemed to vanish completely. Samantha sat there, calm and poised, allowing the effect of her small gesture to settle in. The glimpse of her tattoo had done more than surprise them. It had disrupted the entire energy of the room. The Marine Corps emblem, bold and intricate, told a story far greater than any words she could have spoken at that moment. The men stared, some unable to look away. Their previous confidence, their assumption that she was just a woman, had collapsed in an instant. A few of them opened their mouths as if to speak but found themselves pausing, caught between disbelief and a dawning realization. It was a simple tattoo, yet it carried decades of history, discipline, sacrifice, and courage. To see it revealed casually on the forearm of someone they had underestimated so easily was a jolt none of them expected. Samantha shifted slightly, letting her sleeve move just a little more, making the full design visible. It wasn't flashy or exaggerated, it didn't need to be. Every line, every detail spoke of commitment, endurance, and a willingness to face challenges that most people wouldn't even imagine. She didn't announce her past. She simply let the symbol of her journey speak for itself. The room reacted almost instinctively, as if recognizing authority in a form that couldn't be argued with. One man, the same one who had made the sarcastic remark earlier, froze mid-gesture. His eyes widened, and for the first time, the confident smile he had worn disappeared. He leaned forward slightly, as if trying to confirm what he saw. You're really a Marine?" he asked, his voice low and incredulous. Samantha nodded, her calm expression unwavering. She didn't need to embellish or defend herself. The tattoo alone communicated everything: the years of training, the challenges, the strength, and the discipline she carried within her. Other men in the room began murmuring quietly, some exchanging glances that said more than words ever could. There was a collective recalibration happening almost instantly. The jokes, the mockery, and the assumptions that had filled the air moments ago were vanishing under the weight of undeniable truth. Samantha could feel the shift, the respect forming quietly, the curiosity beginning to replace doubt. She could almost see their thought process. We judged her by her appearance. We thought she was inexperienced, untested, maybe even fragile. But this changes everything. The tattoo, so simple yet so powerful, had revealed a depth of experience they had never imagined. It wasn't arrogance or showmanship. It was proof, undeniable proof, of her commitment, her courage, and the fact that she had endured challenges far greater than anything they had faced in this room. Samantha took a slow breath, allowing herself to feel a quiet sense of satisfaction. This wasn't about shocking anyone for the sake of it. It was about letting the truth speak. For too long, people had underestimated her, dismissed her because of her gender, and laughed at the idea that she could operate in spaces traditionally dominated by men. But the tattoo was more than just ink. It was a testament to her journey, her resilience, and the battles she had faced both on the field and against prejudice. The room gradually began to return to normal activity, but the energy had changed completely. Where there had been laughter and casual dismissal, there was now a careful attentiveness. Questions started to emerge, tentative at first. "How long were you in?" asked one of the younger men, clearly impressed. Another asked, "Where were you deployed?" Samantha answered with calm clarity, sharing details of her training and deployments without a hint of boastfulness. Each answer only reinforced the respect that had begun to replace doubt. It wasn't just the content of her answers that impressed them. It was the confidence with which she spoke, the quiet authority she exuded. The tattoo had opened the door, but her words and demeanor solidified the shift. The men who had been mocking her moments ago were now listening carefully, considering her opinions, and even seeking her input on topics they would never have imagined asking her about earlier. Samantha noticed the subtle change in body language too. Arms that had been crossed in skepticism were now open. Heads that had been tilted with doubt were now upright in attention, and the previous smirks had been replaced by nods of recognition. It was a transformation that happened almost instantly, proving that assumptions, no matter how confidently made, could crumble in the face of truth. As the discussion continued, Samantha realized that this was more than just a personal victory. It was a lesson in humility for the room, a reminder that judgment based on appearance or gender was shallow and often wrong. She had been underestimated, mocked, and dismissed, but through a quiet revelation, she had shifted perceptions entirely. The tattoo wasn't just a mark of her past. It was a symbol that demanded acknowledgement of her strength, skill, and experience. By the time the conversation moved back to strategy and planning, the laughter and mockery had disappeared completely. In their place was respect, attentiveness, and a newfound understanding. The men were no longer looking at her as just a woman. They were seeing Samantha as what she truly was: a Marine, a professional, and someone who had earned her place through courage, dedication, and resilience. In that moment, Samantha knew she had made her mark, not just with ink, but with presence. The tattoo had revealed more than her past. It had revealed the truth of who she was, and the room could no longer deny it. The room was quiet now, but it wasn't the peaceful kind of silence. It was the kind that comes from shock, disbelief, and a sudden recalibration of assumptions. Samantha sat calmly, her forearm resting on the table, the Marine Corps tattoo fully visible. The laughter, the smirks, the whispers of doubt, all of it had vanished in an instant. The men who had mocked her just minutes ago were frozen, caught between the reality of what they were seeing and the assumptions they had made. The contractor who had made the sarcastic remark earlier was the first to try to regain composure. His hand hovered mid-air as if to gesture, but he stopped. You were actually in the Marines?" His voice wavered slightly, betraying both disbelief and respect. Samantha nodded, her calm expression giving nothing away. She didn't feel the need to boast. Her presence, her tattoo, and the quiet confidence she carried were proof enough. Others in the room were reacting in their own ways. Some leaned back in their chairs, mouths slightly open, trying to process the revelation. A few exchanged glances, silent communication passing between them. We judged her wrong. Completely wrong. It was a subtle, almost unconscious acknowledgement, but it carried more weight than any words could. For these men, the realization was profound. Someone they had dismissed as inexperienced and just a woman had served in one of the most demanding branches of the military. Samantha allowed the silence to stretch just long enough for it to sink in. She knew this moment mattered. It wasn't just about surprising them, it was about shifting the perception entirely. People often underestimate what they cannot see. They judge by appearances, by voice, by gender, and sometimes by confidence alone. But the truth, she had learned, always has a way of revealing itself. And in that room, her truth had just become undeniable. Finally, one of the men, slightly shaking his head, broke the silence. I didn't expect. We thought you were. He stopped, realizing the words sounded foolish now. Samantha gave him a gentle smile, one that conveyed understanding rather than condescension. She had faced similar moments countless times, where others tried to define her before knowing her story. Now the tables had turned. "What was it like?" asked another, this time with genuine curiosity. His tone was different, respectful, cautious, and sincere. Samantha glanced at him, appreciating the change in energy. This wasn't a question asked to mock or belittle. It was a real attempt to understand her experience. She nodded and began to answer, starting with her training. "The boot camp was intense," she said, her voice steady. "It tested everything. Physically, mentally, and emotionally. Every day you're pushed to your limits. There are moments where you think you can't go any further, and then you find that you can. That's where the real growth happens." She didn't exaggerate or dramatize. She spoke with quiet authority, letting the words paint the picture of the discipline, resilience, and courage that her service required. She went on to describe deployments, the teamwork necessary in high-pressure situations, and the challenges of being a woman in a male-dominated environment. Each story was shared with clarity and honesty, revealing both the struggles and the triumphs. As she spoke, the men listened intently, nodding at appropriate moments, some even jotting down notes. The room had transformed from a place of mockery to one of learning, and she had facilitated that change without confrontation, only through truth. Samantha also shared the small, human moments that often go unnoticed in stories of service. The camaraderie with fellow Marines, the quiet determination required in difficult situations, and the pride that comes from accomplishing something most people would never attempt. These details made her story relatable, even as it impressed upon them the gravity of her experiences. The tattoo had been the spark, but the substance of her life had now captured their attention. A few men who had been the loudest in their jokes were now leaning forward, listening more than speaking. Their earlier confidence had given way to respect, and some of them even admitted silently to themselves that they had been wrong. The room, once filled with underestimation, was now filled with acknowledgement. The shift was subtle, yet profound, and Samantha could feel it. She didn't need applause or validation. She simply needed them to recognize reality, and they had. By the time she finished speaking, the room had transformed completely. The mocking energy was gone, replaced by curiosity, attentiveness, and quiet admiration. The men now understood something they hadn't before. Strength, skill, and courage are not defined by appearance or gender. They could no longer dismiss her or label her as just a woman. She had earned their respect in a single transformative moment, not through anger or argument, but through proof and quiet confidence. As conversations began to resume, this time with a new tone, Samantha noticed the subtle changes in posture, tone, and engagement. Questions were asked respectfully. Ideas were considered thoughtfully. Even those who had doubted her most were now seeking her input, testing their assumptions against her knowledge and experience. The room, once a space of mockery, had become a space of learning and recognition. In that moment, Samantha understood the true power of her story, her presence, and even her tattoo. It wasn't just about revealing a past achievement. It was about shattering expectations, demanding recognition, and showing that assumptions, no matter how confidently held, can be challenged and changed. She had done exactly that. Samantha paused for a moment, letting the room settle into quiet curiosity. The men, now fully attentive, seemed to understand that this was no longer a casual conversation. They were about to hear her story, the story behind the tattoo that had silenced their doubts. She took a slow breath and began, her voice steady and calm, carrying the weight of experience and the quiet confidence of someone who had faced challenges few could imagine. "I joined the Marine Corps straight out of high school," she began, her tone matter-of-fact. "I wanted to test myself, to push my limits, and to see what I was really capable of. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and I knew I'd have to work twice as hard to prove myself. Not just to others, but to myself." She glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of those who had doubted her earlier. Their expressions were sober now, attentive, even a little humbled. "The first weeks of boot camp were the hardest," she continued. "The instructors pushed us beyond what we thought was possible. We ran before sunrise, carried packs heavier than our own weight, and faced challenges that seemed impossible. It wasn't just about physical strength. It was about mental toughness, teamwork, and determination. Every day was a test of endurance, focus, and courage." Her words painted a vivid picture, making the men realize that the toughness she carried wasn't just symbolic. It was forged through real hardship. She spoke of the moments when she felt completely exhausted, when the body wanted to quit but the mind had to keep going. "There were days when I thought I couldn't make it another step, another push-up, another mile," she said. "But the Marine Corps teaches you that strength isn't just about muscle. It's about persistence, discipline, and refusing to give up even when everything inside you is screaming to stop. That's when you find out who you really are." Samantha's calm demeanor made the stories even more powerful. She didn't dramatize or exaggerate. She let the reality of her experiences speak for itself. She spoke of camaraderie, of relying on fellow Marines in situations where trust and teamwork were everything. "We learned to depend on each other completely," she explained. "You can't do this alone. Your fellow Marines are your family, and you fight, struggle, and survive together. That bond, it changes you." Then she shared the challenges unique to being a woman in the Corps. "It wasn't easy," she admitted. "Some people doubted me from the start. Some thought I couldn't handle the training. I was underestimated constantly. But that didn't stop me. It made me stronger. Every time someone said I couldn't do something, I reminded myself that my determination mattered more than their doubts. I learned to focus on what I could control, my effort, my skills, my discipline." She spoke of deployments, the long months away from family, the missions that tested her skills, and the critical moments when quick thinking and courage mattered more than anything else. "I faced situations where hesitation could have cost lives," she said quietly. "You learn to act fast, to make decisions under pressure, and to stay calm even when everything around you is chaos. That kind of training, it changes you. It makes you capable of more than you ever imagined." The men listened in silence, clearly impressed by the depth of her experience. Her story wasn't just about physical challenges. It was about resilience, strategy, and emotional strength. They could see now why her insights during the earlier discussions weren't just smart guesses. They came from real experience, from having been in situations where decisions mattered in life-or-death scenarios. Samantha also talked about the tattoo itself. "I got this tattoo after completing my first deployment," she explained. "It's more than just ink. It's a reminder of everything I went through, the training, the struggles, the victories, and the people who supported me. It's a mark of commitment, courage, and resilience. Every time I see it, I remember that I've faced challenges and come out stronger. It's a part of me that tells the world I've earned my place." Her words carried weight because they were honest and grounded. The men weren't hearing a boast, they were hearing truth. They could feel the strength behind her calm voice, the authenticity of her experiences, and the quiet power of someone who had been underestimated and proven herself repeatedly. By the time she finished, the energy in the room had completely shifted. The skepticism that had filled the air earlier was gone. In its place was respect, attentiveness, and genuine interest. Questions began to emerge, not from mockery but from curiosity and admiration. "What was the hardest part of boot camp?" asked one man. "How did you handle deployments so far from home?" asked another. Samantha answered each one calmly, her words detailed, relatable, and honest, reinforcing the impression that her knowledge and courage were real. In that room, the men realized something important. Assumptions are often wrong, and strength can't be judged by appearances alone. Samantha had not only shared the story behind her tattoo, she had shared the story behind her life, her resilience, and her determination. They were no longer seeing just a woman. They were seeing a Marine, a professional, and a person who had earned every bit of respect she deserved. And for Samantha, this moment was not about proving herself. It was about allowing the truth to speak for itself. Her story, her experience, and her tattoo had done exactly that. After Samantha finished sharing her story, the atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. The earlier tension, the subtle mockery, and the skeptical glances had all but disappeared. In their place was a quiet attentiveness and respect that Samantha could feel radiating from the group. The men, who had moments ago been laughing and underestimating her, were now listening carefully, considering her insights, and beginning to see her as an equal participant. For Samantha, this was familiar territory. She had learned over the years that respect wasn't demanded, it was earned. And the key was patience, confidence, and allowing her actions and words to demonstrate competence. She could see it happening now, slowly but unmistakably. The men who had doubted her were recalibrating, evaluating her knowledge and contributions without the lens of gender bias clouding their judgment. One of the contractors, a senior man with a reputation for being tough and outspoken, leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "You mentioned handling deployment situations under pressure," he said. "How did you make decisions when everything was so chaotic?" Samantha smiled faintly, appreciating the sincerity behind the question. She explained how training and experience had taught her to stay calm, assess all available information, and make decisions quickly while considering both the people involved and the mission at hand. As she spoke, more questions came, each one reflecting genuine interest and a desire to understand her perspective. The room had transformed from a space of skepticism to one of learning. Every insight Samantha shared was met with nods, thoughtful murmurs, or follow-up questions. The men were no longer seeing her as someone to doubt or underestimate. They were seeing her as a professional whose experience added real value to their discussions. Samantha noticed subtle changes in their body language. Arms that had been crossed in skepticism were now open, leaning slightly forward in engagement. Eyes that had been rolling or flicking away were now focused directly on her, attentive and respectful. Even the man who had been the loudest in mocking earlier now asked a question, his tone measured and careful, showing a clear shift in attitude. It was a complete transformation, and Samantha felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. As the discussion moved to tactical strategies and complex scenarios, Samantha began offering her own ideas and solutions. She explained approaches to coordination, resource allocation, and risk management, grounding her suggestions in both practical experience and strategic reasoning. Unlike before, when her contributions had been met with polite nods or mild surprise, now her ideas sparked active discussion and debate. The men listened carefully, weighed her input, and incorporated her suggestions into their planning. It was clear that her expertise was not just recognized, it was valued. Throughout the conversation, Samantha remained composed. She spoke calmly, clearly, and logically, allowing her credibility to shine without arrogance. The quiet confidence that had once caused the men to underestimate her was now an undeniable sign of authority. They had started by assuming she lacked the experience or knowledge to contribute meaningfully, but her calm guidance and insight had completely reversed that perception. The shift was not only intellectual but emotional as well. The room, once filled with subtle dismissiveness, was now filled with a sense of respect and acknowledgement. Some of the men even admitted silently to themselves that their earlier judgments had been wrong. Samantha's presence, her expertise, and the story behind her tattoo had reshaped the entire dynamic. She had earned a seat not only at the table but in their minds as someone whose voice carried weight and authority. As the discussion continued, it became clear that the men were no longer just tolerating her presence. They were seeking it. Questions about tactics, training, and strategy were directed to her first, demonstrating a level of trust and recognition that would have been unimaginable before her tattoo had been revealed. Every word she spoke now carried authority, and the room responded with engagement rather than doubt. Samantha realized that this was one of the most powerful lessons she could demonstrate. Competence, courage, and resilience could transform perceptions. She had been underestimated, mocked, and dismissed, but by staying composed, sharing her experience, and letting her skills speak, she had turned skepticism into respect. The men had learned something important. Assumptions based on gender, appearance, or superficial judgment could be completely wrong. By the end of the session, Samantha's influence was clear. Her suggestions had been incorporated into the planning. Her advice had guided the discussion, and the men who had once doubted her were now actively engaging with her ideas. The laughter, the dismissive gestures, and the casual mockery were replaced by nods, thoughtful questions, and a genuine willingness to consider her perspective. She had earned their respect not through confrontation, but through demonstration of skill, insight, and experience. As the meeting wrapped up, Samantha felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The transformation in the room had been complete. Where there had once been doubt, there was now recognition. Where there had been underestimation, there was now genuine respect. Her journey, her knowledge, and her presence had made an impact, proving that assumptions could be challenged and changed when met with courage, skill, and calm confidence. For Samantha, this was not just a personal victory. It was a reminder of the power of perseverance and the importance of letting truth speak for itself. The room had witnessed it firsthand. A woman, once underestimated, had shown that competence, resilience, and courage could not be ignored. She had shattered stereotypes, earned respect, and proven that strength is defined not by appearance, but by experience, knowledge, and character. By the time the meeting was coming to a close, the room had completely changed. The energy that had been filled with skepticism, mockery, and doubt at the beginning had transformed into one of respect, attentiveness, and recognition. Samantha sat quietly, her posture calm and confident, knowing that she had not only participated in the discussion, but had also shifted the perceptions of every person in the room. The laughter and dismissive comments from earlier were long gone, replaced by thoughtful nods and engaged expressions. She could feel it in the way the men spoke now, the way they asked questions, and the way they considered her suggestions seriously. They were no longer thinking of her as just a woman or assuming she lacked experience. They were seeing her as a professional, a strategist, and a marine whose skills and insights demanded attention. What had begun as doubt and mockery had turned into acknowledgement and genuine respect. As the session wrapped up, one of the senior contractors approached her. He had been the loudest in his early skepticism, the one who had made jokes at her expense. Now, however, his tone was different, respectful, almost cautious, but sincere. "I have to admit," he said, "I didn't expect what you brought to the table today. Your experience, your insights, it's impressive. I underestimated you, and I was wrong." Samantha offered a small, polite smile, appreciating the honesty. She didn't need to celebrate the acknowledgement. The respect itself was enough. Others gathered around as well, some asking for clarification on points she had raised, others seeking her advice for future discussions. Even those who had been quietly observing now leaned in to listen more carefully, asking questions that showed they valued her opinion. The transformation was complete. She had gone from being underestimated and mocked to being recognized as someone whose voice mattered, whose expertise was respected, and whose experience could not be ignored. As Samantha packed up her notebook and prepared to leave, she reflected on the journey of the day. It had been more than just a meeting or a discussion. It had been a lesson in perception, bias, and the power of presence. She had walked into the room quietly, aware of the assumptions that would be made about her. She had faced mockery and skepticism, but she had also carried with her the confidence that came from real experience, real challenges, and real accomplishments. Her Marine Corps tattoo had been a catalyst, yes, but it was the story behind it, the skills and resilience it represented, that truly earned her respect. The room had seen, in a short time, the power of proof over prejudice. Samantha had demonstrated that strength, knowledge, and competence are not determined by gender, appearance, or the initial assumptions people make. She had shown that respect is earned not by demanding it but by embodying it through actions, experience, and calm confidence. Every question asked of her now, every nod and thoughtful pause, was a silent acknowledgement of that truth. Even as she walked toward the door, Samantha noticed the subtle changes in the men's expressions. There was a sense of admiration, a quiet realization that assumptions can be wrong, and that underestimating someone based on superficial traits is a mistake. It was clear that her presence, her story, and her insights had left a lasting impression, one that would influence the way they interacted with others in the future. She had not only earned respect for herself but had also opened a door for understanding and equality in that space. As she stepped out of the room, Samantha allowed herself a moment of reflection. This had been more than just proving her capability. It had been about breaking stereotypes and showing that competence, courage, and determination are not defined by gender. She had turned doubt into respect, mockery into acknowledgement, and skepticism into genuine curiosity. She knew that the story she carried, the experiences behind her tattoo, and the quiet confidence she exhibited would continue to resonate long after she had left. Samantha also understood something deeper about human nature. People often judge quickly, relying on appearances or assumptions. They underestimate others because it's easier than assessing real capability. But when confronted with undeniable truth through action, experience, or evidence, those judgments change, sometimes instantly. She had experienced that change firsthand today, and it reinforced a lesson she had carried through her military career. Never let assumptions define you, and let your skills and integrity speak for themselves. By the time she walked down the corridor, she felt a quiet pride, not arrogance. The respect she had earned was real, genuine, and hard-won. It wasn't about proving superiority. It was about revealing reality. The men in that room had seen her for who she truly was. A Marine, a professional, a resilient and capable individual. The laughter that had once tried to diminish her presence had been replaced by recognition of her strength and skill. She had shattered the stereotypes quietly but completely. As Samantha stepped outside into the sunlight, she felt a sense of closure and empowerment. Today had proven that assumptions can be challenged, that courage and competence cannot be ignored, and that respect is earned by embodying one's truth, not by demanding it. She had turned a room full of doubt into one of acknowledgement, and in doing so, had reminded everyone present that strength, determination, and experience know no gender. And in that realization, Samantha walked away with a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had left a lasting impression. Not through confrontation or argument, but through proof, presence, and unwavering confidence in who she was.